welcome back to Yoga Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Waycott. We are back for another week of the podcast, and it's a long weekend here in Canada and probably in lots of other places in the world as well. And I am taking Monday off from teaching this week because of the long weekend. And I'm excited to have a little bit of extra time this week to dedicate to some preparation for the upcoming Verbal Cues Masterclass that I'm teaching. And on last week's episode, if you listen to the episodes like weekly in chronological order, I said that I had 3 spaces left in the masterclass, but I think shortly after it went live, those 3 spaces were filled up. So the masterclass is totally full and sold out. And I'm sorry if you missed this round, but I'm sure that I will run it again. So I just wanted to update you on that in case you were still hoping to register. It's just due to the capacity of this space, right? I can only fit so many bodies in the room. But yeah, I'm sure that I'll do it again. So anyways, it's been a nice long weekend and the sun is out. It's become significantly warmer here, which is so nice. So we took our dog on 2 pretty big walks yesterday, and it just it feels like such a relief, when you live in a cold, wet climate, for spring to finally start to arrive. I feel like it just really changes everyone's mood and gives you hope that the warmer, sunnier days are coming. If you're like me and you prefer the sunshine over the gloom. So to kind of get into the episode for today, I have been thinking about how hosting yoga workshops is one of the most powerful ways to grow as a yoga teacher and expand your income. But not every workshop is well executed, especially in the planning stages. And this can definitely cause low attendance and a bit of confusion for your students. So today on the podcast, I am sharing my non-negotiables for creating yoga workshops that feel clear right from the initial planning stages before your students even enter the room. So I'm really thinking about the preparation that goes into the workshop, and not only the content of the workshop itself, but I'm thinking about the financial side of things, all of the other aspects policies and whatnot as well that go into creating a workshop. So let's dive into today's episode together. Now, when I first started offering educational workshops, it definitely became a natural segue into the work that I do now with yoga teachers, offering continuing education and yoga teacher trainings. Workshops were truly the perfect stepping stone for me to move towards this type of work, especially if it is your goal to eventually train teachers one day. And I would say that even if training teachers is not your goal, and it's not something that you're interested in, workshops are still an opportunity for you to offer your students a lot more depth than they would typically get in a regular yoga class. And it's something that is absolutely going to grow your teaching skills. So when I first started offering workshops consistently, it was really based off of an observation that I'd made while teaching public classes. And at the time, I had started teaching in one particular space that had a really strong community. They had great, consistent students, really full classes there. And those students were used to classes where most of the teachers taught in kind of a set format where they stayed on their mat the whole time. They took everyone through the motions, and a lot of the people there were there with a little bit more of a fitness kind of mindset where they really just wanted to get that movement in. They wanted to sweat. They just, wanted to get in and get out. And that was kind of the vibe. And people really, really liked it. But when I started teaching there, one of the first things that I started to hear in terms of feedback from the students was that my teaching style and approach was really different from what they had become used to over the years. And they weren't used to having a teacher who got off their mat and walked around the room. They weren't used to having a teacher who would approach individual students during a group class and offer suggestions or bring props or maybe show people like a different way of doing things. And there were even instances where this is totally normal for me, but it wasn't necessarily normal for the students at the time, where I'd be teaching a public group class and I would notice that maybe there was something that wasn't going super well. And I felt like the folks there could use a little bit more support or direction with something specific. And I would stop the class and do a bit more of a demo or kind of like a workshop style moment. And so much of this feedback coming through from these students who'd been practicing for years was that they had never had a lot of like basic skills and techniques actually like broken down for them. They'd never been shown how to use their props. And what I saw was that this community was really eager to learn and really be taught and not just be taken through the motions. So I took that opportunity to begin offering some asana workshops at the time, and this was many years ago. And a lot of the times we would work with like a particular family of poses, or maybe we would work towards a peak pose. So if we were working towards a family of poses, let's say it was back bends, for example, we would usually spend like 2 or 2.5 hours doing a practice that was progressive. We would stop a lot and break things down and really look at the fundamental principles of backbending and how those principles apply in common backbends that you would see in a lot of yoga classes like Cobra Pose. And I would show people how to adapt those common poses and integrate props. And the value of the workshop was that people were going to leave with skills and with knowledge that they could apply themselves in any yoga class that they were taking, even if it was one of those classes where the expectation was that the teacher was going to stay on the mat and do the whole practice with them. They were empowered with the knowledge to be able to take care of themselves. And those went really, really well. And over time, offering these educational asana workshops evolved into offerings that were a bit more teacher focused. And I started offering like morning intensives for yoga teachers and peer mentorship style like workshops, weekend long continuing education trainings on things like sequencing, and then eventually wrote a curriculum for like a 200-hour YTT. And the responsibility and the preparation and like the time required on my end became greater. But with that, I was also able to charge more and be paid quite well for my time. So I would say if you are looking to do more things independently, or if you're looking to kind of branch out from like drop-in style classes, starting with smaller workshops can be like a really, really great stepping stone for you as a yoga teacher. But we all have to start somewhere. Workshops do give you an opportunity to step into a bit more leadership and responsibility in your teaching. It's a chance for you to provide more depth to your students. And I would say that like programming workshops can really help take you to new edges in your teaching as well, right? It is more work. It is more planning than just teaching a regular yoga class. So over the years, I have definitely made a lot of mistakes when it comes to running workshops, and I've paid for them in lots of different ways, financially, My ego has paid for, for some of the mistakes at times. And I've definitely, learned the hard way in certain moments, as we all do. But every time I have encountered a challenge when it comes to running workshops or trainings, or maybe something that didn't go so well, I always take that as an opportunity to learn and refine my process. And so today I am sharing my non-negotiables for setting up yoga workshops in a way that feels clear and kind for you and for your students before they even enter the room. Now, the first thing you need for your yoga workshop is a really clear container. You need to be able to communicate what your workshop actually is, and ideally it's in the name. Now, I know that it is really tempting to come up with a whimsical, creative name for all of our workshops and offerings, but people need to know what they're signing up for. And they need to know not just the topic of the workshop, but they also need to have an inkling of the transformation or the value that they are going to receive. Now, I see a lot of workshops out there that kind of look the same. And I noticed that a lot of the kind of descriptions for the workshops are pretty vague. And it's kind of like, we're going to do some yoga, we're going to do some breath work, we're going to journal, we're going to cold plunge. And like, those are all nice, fun things. But the transformation is not always defined. It's not always made clear for the potential students who might be signing up. So when you are first kind of dreaming up the workshop, I would take the opportunity to name the changes for your students. So get super, super clear on what they are going to be able to feel or understand or do differently by the end of the workshop. And this is the thing that is going to make people want to sign up. And this is the thing where like you can start to differentiate yourself from a lot of the workshops out there that are more vague. And it doesn't mean that the workshop itself is vague, like when you actually go and participate in it. But to get people in the door, you have to give people a clear sense of what to expect. And I feel like just on a personal level, like nothing turns me off more than a lack of clarity. If the workshop description is vague, even if like this isn't necessarily true, the message that it sends across to the potential buyer is that you haven't put much time or energy into the preparation. And if your buyer is going to pay a premium for something that they're going to learn or something that they're going to experience, you need to let them know what that thing is. Like, what are they going to get from the workshop? And can you be really clear about it? I think that that is super, super important in these initial planning stages. You are also going to want to make sure that the scope of your workshop matches the amount of time that you have available to teach. So a 2-hour workshop, for example, is not going to be able to deliver the same experience as a 200-hour training. So you want to be really honest and really precise about what fits inside like that time container that you have so that the workshop feels complete and so that it doesn't feel rushed or scattered. And you also can't be afraid to set expectations up front. So I know that so many of us want to be able to say this workshop is for everyone because we don't want to exclude anyone and we don't want to miss out on potential signups. But clarity is kind, and it is more than okay to tell people if the workshop is open level or if there are specific prerequisites. You can also share some information about the pace of the workshop, the format. So like, is there a lecture portion? Is there a physical practice? Are there like asana labs or breakdowns? Is there partner work? When people know what they are walking into, that is one of the things that really builds trust between us and our students. And I think that you'll notice that the right people for your workshop will sign up when you make that little bit of effort to kind of manage expectations and just be clear right from the beginning about like who the workshop is for, what's going to happen in it, what's the transformation that people are going to get. So in terms of creating a clear container for the workshop itself, my non-negotiables are a clear workshop name and a description that communicates not only the topic of the workshop, but the transformation or value that your students are going to receive. You want to make sure that the scope of education that you're offering matches the length of the workshop, because we can only do so much in, a set amount of time. And you need to set really clear expectations up front so that it's obvious who the workshop is for and what is actually going to happen during the workshop. Now, next up, you need to consider your policies. I would say that policies are a form of structure that protects you and your students. Like, they are in place to kind of take care of everyone. And you want to decide your cancellation policy and your refund policy before you launch. So before you announce your workshop, before you start taking signups, you need to spend a little bit of time thinking about those things. And this is one of the really specific lessons that I absolutely learned the hard way. When I first started offering workshops and smaller trainings, I didn't have any sort of cancellation or refund policy. And it was because I had never really needed one, right? And I remember one of the first times I ran a weekend training. It was a bigger ticket item just in terms of like the cost compared to other offerings that I had put out into the community prior. And I was running it independently. I was renting my own space. I was teaching under my name. It wasn't part of anybody else's studio or yoga school. And I had a participant cancel with pretty short notice because they had decided to enroll in another yoga teacher training with like a pretty famous kind of like Hollywood yoga teacher. And this is just like, it's such a funny thing because it just like stands out so much in my mind as such a good lesson in like running a yoga business. But when it happened, I didn't know what to do. This was a long time ago. I didn't have any kind of policy or any kind of protocol in place. And because I was teaching independently, it's not like I could just pass off this kind of awkward conversation to a manager or a studio owner and be like, hey, you have this awkward conversation with the student. When you teach independently, it means that you are responsible for having tough conversations with people at times. And so I ended up, before I got back to the student, I ended up reaching out to a mentor of mine to ask like what they would do in this particular situation. And they were pretty much like, if you didn't have a cancellation policy in place, you're on the hook. And like, even though it's shitty, you should probably refund your student. And so I did. And I learned my lesson. And now I always make sure to have a very obvious cancellation and refund policy that is decided ahead of time, and not when somebody emails and then asks for some sort of exception. Like, that policy and cancellation policy rather is like decided before anybody even gets to sign up, because cancellations absolutely do come up, and there is a lot on the line for us as yoga teachers. So a cancellation policy can help keep things really clear for everyone so that you are not panicking when you do get one of those like inevitable cancellations or somebody maybe even asking for a refund. In terms of policies, you also need to set a viable number of participants for your workshop. So you really want to know your numbers. If you need, say, 6 people to make it worth your time and your energy and your cost, say that really clearly, stick to it, and then try to decide on this ahead of time as well, because otherwise you run the risk of paying to teach, which totally sucks. Or you also run the risk of maybe like canceling on your students last minute because you decided it's not financially viable. So you can let people know, hey, this workshop needs X amount of participants by X date in order to run. You want to communicate your policies confidently and visibly. So if you have a landing page where people sign up, put your policies there. If you have a newsletter that you send out, announcing signups for your workshop, put your policies there so that it is obvious and there isn't any sort of like hidden fine print. We want to just like keep things transparent and out in the open when we can. This is really all about clarity. And when you're clear with people up front, I would say that it means that you have to have fewer awkward conversations, and it creates more professional trust. So you're not being like strict or mean or anything like that by having policies. You are being professional and you are managing expectations for yourself and for your students. So non-negotiables in terms of policies for me when I am setting up a workshop or like a smaller training are to decide on my cancellation and refund policy before I launch, set a minimum viable number of participants before I launch, and communicate policies confidently and also visibly where people can see them before they pay. So before they commit to the workshop and decide if it's for them or not, you want to make sure that they can see your policies somewhere. Now, next up is considering your financial structure. And I know that this is something that a lot of yoga teachers feel is like really tricky. How do we figure out how to price our offerings in order to pay ourselves, but also keep things accessible for people and not undercut other people or other businesses in our community? So when you're pricing out your workshop, really think about pricing for sustainability. And I know it can feel tempting to underprice in order to fill the room, or maybe we think like if we price something really low, we'll be able to get lots and lots of people and that volume of attendees will make up for the low price. But I would say that low pricing doesn't necessarily communicate value. So price your workshop based on your experience, based on the depth of what you're offering, and then the actual cost as well of running the workshop. And on top of that, I would do some research and figure out the price of similar offerings in your area so that you can compare and like just stay in touch with reality and kind of try to keep it fair without undercutting what someone else is doing. You definitely need to require payment upfront. So this is another lesson that I learned the hard way with running workshops. I used to be way too easygoing about participants paying for things. And people would email me or send me a message and they would be like, hey, save me a spot in your workshop. And I would be like, sure, your spot is saved. And I was just like way too trusting that people would actually pay. And I'm sure some of you listening know that is not always the case. So I would just like save people's spots, but I wouldn't actually like communicate to them that they needed to pay in order to like secure the spot and actually have it saved. And there's one workshop that really stands out to me in my mind where I really learned this lesson. So I used to offer like peer mentorship style workshops where I would rent out a space for like 3 hours. And it was all geared towards yoga teachers. So I would teach like a themed practice, and then I would deliver like a shorter lecture or presentation based on something teaching specific. So like verbal cues or something business related or developing your home yoga practice, like something that yoga teachers could benefit from. And then it would kind of lead into a group discussion. And I remember one of these peer mentorship groups, I had like 8 cancellations all in the same morning, like an hour before I was supposed to start teaching. And it was my fault. Like, I did not require payment up front for those spots. And I was just counting on those people showing up. And like, just because I'm the kind of person who might sign up for something and like, you know, if I say I'm going to be somewhere, like I'll be there. Not everybody is like that. And I was just naive and I didn't require payment up front. And yeah, like it was my fault. I was leaving money on the table. And the biggest thing was that I was not honoring the time and the energy that I was putting into creating this offering for my community. And now for anything I'm doing, I always require payment up front, and I make sure to communicate that your spot is not saved until you've paid for it. And I find that that creates much better commitment, and you will see better attendance. And even if people pay and sign up and don't show up for the offering, if you have a cancellation policy in place or a refund policy in place, like that is probably going to take care of you in those kinds of circumstances, right? But yeah, another big lesson that stands out to me, and I just feel like you can avoid a lot of disappointment. You can avoid those kinds of things where people, you know, flake out and no show at the last minute. When you know, ask for their commitment ahead of time, right? And I feel like if you're going to put in the work and put in the planning of like creating workshops and creating education for your community, and you're showing up and doing this, like you can ask for commitment from other people as well, right? In the form of them paying ahead. Before you launch your workshop, you really need to understand your numbers as well. So take the time to know what your expenses for the workshop are going to be. So think about like the cost of your venue rental, the cost of supplies, if there are any print materials like manuals or workbooks or handouts that you need to pay for, if you're offering food or coffee, plus your time and like the preparation for the workshop as well. You really want to try to figure out what all those expenses are so you can determine your break-even point. And that information is going to come in really handy when you are pricing your workshop and when you are determining the number of participants required in order for the workshop to run. So in terms of financial structure, my non-negotiables are that I'm pricing for sustainability, that I am going to require payment upfront in order to save anyone's spot, and that I've taken the time to understand my numbers so that I'm setting myself up to profit from the workshop and not pay to teach. Now, the last thing for today is to consider the depth of what you are actually planning to teach. So when you're planning your workshop, teach something really specific. You don't need to try to cram everything you know into an afternoon. And this is one of the things where sometimes I think I see people who are maybe first getting into running workshops, and in the description of the workshop, it's like the workshop is maybe only 2 or 3 hours, and there are so many different things listed within that time span. Like we're going to do all of these different things and have all of these different experiences in 2 or 3 hours. And I just find like when you actually start to teach workshops, less is usually more, and it's usually pretty challenging to deliver all of those different things well within a shorter time span of a couple of hours. So my biggest piece of advice is focus on depth over breadth. So rather than trying to cover all sorts of different things or offer a ton of different experiences, get really specific. Workshops provide the opportunity to go deep on something very specific. And I feel like when you try to cover too much ground in one workshop, it can potentially dilute the experience for you and for your students. I also recommend that you pull from your internal reservoir of knowledge and teach based on your real expertise. So when you're creating workshops, don't worry about what's trendy. Trends don't have longevity anyways. Like you've heard me say this a million times before. You're always going to be kind of like scrambling and trying to come up with the next best thing if you are teaching based on trends. So instead, think about what people already come to you for. What do they want to know from you? What is the one thing you always get feedback on? Why do people come to your classes? That's your workshop. Okay, that's where you're going to get information about what to teach. So like teach from what's inside, from what you already know, and try to go beyond offering just a class that's like longer than usual. See if you can go a little bit deeper than just a long yoga class. A workshop is an opportunity to provide context for the practices we engage in. It is a chance to uncover like the why behind these practices, the how behind these practices. It's a chance for you to break things down in detail, work to build specific skills, and let your students try things or experience things that maybe they wouldn't have time to do in a regular public drop-in class. So I would say if you can make your workshop educational and not just an extended, like long yoga practice, your students are going to walk away with more value, and they're going to walk away with value that like stays with them for life and for, you know, the rest of the time that they are practicing yoga. So when I share episodes like this on Yoga Insider, I'm always speaking from lived experience. I'm speaking from my own trial and error. I'm speaking from the things that worked and the things that didn't work. And my goal is that you get to refine your teaching maybe a little bit faster than I did. And maybe you can skip some of those learning curves along the way. But if you're looking to branch out from studio classes, workshops are definitely a really natural next step, and they are absolutely going to give you space to go deeper with your students. And I feel like this type of teaching can really start shaping your work as a teacher as well, kind of beyond the drop-in class model. And at the same time, workshops ask more of you. They ask for more clarity. They ask for more structure. They usually require that you take on some more responsibility and ownership over the way that you teach and over the way that you run your business. Everything I've shared in this episode, these non-negotiables, has been refined over time through real experience, teaching workshops and teaching trainings and hosting workshops and like just making continual adjustments and refinements over time, learning through experience. And my intention is that your next workshop maybe feels a little bit smoother or a little bit more aligned, just like right from that initial planning process, especially if you're newer to teaching or newer to running workshops. It can feel a a bit daunting. Like there's a lot more to it than just showing up at someone's studio and teaching a class, right? There's a lot of thought and preparation that goes into this type of offering. So if you have found this episode supportive at all, here are a few free things that you can do to support Yoga Insider Podcast. One is to leave a rating or a review wherever you're listening. Another is to leave a comment on this episode. So if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can leave a comment. You could share the episode on social media, or you could send the episode to another yoga teacher who you think might enjoy it or benefit from it. We have thousands of listeners who have tuned into the podcast so far, but we only have a really small number of ratings. And it truly makes a difference in getting the podcast out in front of other yoga teachers around the world who could benefit from these types of conversations. So if there's one thing that you could do for me today, it would be share the podcast or leave a review. And that just tells all the algorithms out there to show it to more people. So thank you so much for being here. Thanks for tuning in to Yoga Insider Podcast. I'll see you next time.